Another year, another controversial Corey Pronman draft ranking. Let's go over onto his latest published piece on The Athletic and just review some of the top picks. Not actually read the article. It's The Athletic. It's paid for material. We're not going to go ahead and do that. But this will be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read this. Corey Pronman ranked 127 prospects, and this was from yesterday. No, 2 days ago. So, link in the description if you want to go ahead and read that, only if you do have The Athletic. But as you can read from the title of the article, you can kind of see where exactly this video is going to go down. NHL Draft 2022 Top 127 Prospects. Juraj Slafkovsky leads Corey Pronman's list. So yeah, that's our conversation today. The 2022 NHL Entry Draft and what the first overall pick should be. In fact, we have to get into semantics here before we dive in deep with Wright and Slafkovsky and Cooley and the Devils and the Canadiens, because when you say Corey Pronman's rankings, quote-unquote, what that says to me is his own personal list of who he thinks is going to project better into the long-term future. Normally, for draft prospects, or not draft prospects, but for draft people, people who scout and analyze these prospects and take a look at them and rank them on a system of theirs, it usually goes along the lines of saying, okay, if I rank Slafkovsky over Wright, it means that I think that Slafkovsky has a higher likelihood of becoming a better player in the NHL than Wright in, let's say, 10, 15 years by the time these guys' careers are over. When you rank players, it does not necessarily mean I'm thinking that Slafkovsky is a better player than Wright now. It's all about future and long-term projectability with prospects. That's kind of the entire point of scouting. Also, when you're talking about draft rankings, it usually is just one person's opinion saying, okay, I think this player is going to be better than this player. It's not necessarily saying, because I have Slafkovsky over Wright in my own draft rankings, that Montreal is going to take Slafkovsky over Wright. That would be a mock draft. And a mock draft is not the same, technically, as rankings, because you could go into the psyches of NHL teams and say, okay, I personally, like me, the guy writing the rankings, am allowed to think that Nemec is a better long-term prospect than Cooley. I think he's got better potential. I think in 15 years, we'll be looking at Nemec as a better player than Logan Cooley was at the NHL level. But do I really think the New Jersey Devils are going to think the same way? Maybe in my mock draft, I'll have Cooley as the number 2, and Nemec is going to be number 4 or number 5 or something, even though I might personally think that Nemec is a better prospect than everybody. There's a difference between draft rankings and a mock draft, and that's the first big lesson in semantics that I think we really have to discuss before we get into the nitty-gritty of this video. This is the top 5 that Corey Pronman has on his draft rankings for 2022. Juraj Slafkovsky, Shane Wright, Logan Cooley, David Jiricek, Simon Nemec. Now, this top 5 is pretty consistent with what people have been saying in other parts of the scouting world. It's just in a different order. I've seen a lot of people mostly ranking Wright number 1, Cooley 2, Slafkovsky is 2 on some lists, and then you have some combination of Jiricek and Nemec. So it's a little bit more in line with what we have seen from the past. However, having Slafkovsky at number 1 definitely is a bold decision. Now, I did say we're not going to go out there and read the article in its entirety, but there was a little excerpt that I wanted to highlight here from this piece that was discussed about in a Reddit comment. Here is what Pronman says about Slafkovsky and his recent evaluation. Slafkovsky's skill set is more attractive, and he continued to pile on impressive performances this season at various tournaments, with the talent he displayed at the World Championships being enough to just nudge him ahead of Wright for me. This commenter, Byken, says nudging Slafkovsky ahead of Wright because of his performance at the Worlds is kind of a bold move, to be honest. Since Wright didn't get to compete with NHL-caliber players like Slafkovsky did, using that to propel him at first overall is a little much, in my opinion. And that's a very fair point. Where Juraj Slafkovsky went over to the World Championships for Team Slovakia and had 9 points in 8 games, you had Shane Wright, who didn't even suit up for Team Canada. Now, could he have? I think he could have. I think he definitely would have been able to tango with NHL caliber players in the World Championships, especially with the mentorship of guys like Barzal and Batherson and all the other good NHL caliber players there were. Now, would Wright have been a number one player on that team with Pierre-Luc Dubois? Would he have been a power play specialist alongside that top unit? Probably not, but just having him there and giving him the experience to shine on that level would have been impressive in its own right, even if he didn't produce too many points. Look at what Owen Power did last year at the Worlds then. He didn't produce the lights out, but he played a solid enough game with NHL caliber talent with Troy Stecher as his right side D-man for a lot of scouts to go out there and say, yeah, look at Owen Power. He's such a good mature defenseman playing with adults that this guy deserves to be drafted first overall. The problem is, you don't have prospects who are always given that opportunity, so Shane Wright kind of suffers in that respect. Furthermore, you have Juraj Slafkovsky and his league play this season, which, as we've noted a few videos ago, was not necessarily the best. 10 points in 31 games played in the regular season. That was worse than other not Finnish necessarily players, but players who played in the Finnish Liga, like, for example, Kupari, you have Capo Kakko, you have Kotkaniemi, a whole bunch of other guys who outproduced Slafkovsky in a magnitude of ways. Now, there are a few arguments to go against that. Hey, Slafkovsky is not a Finnish guy himself. He wasn't being given the top line role on that team, so it's not necessarily like he had the best opportunity. But when it comes to Slafkovsky and the body of work he has done, while it is impressive, I don't usually think that this is a good enough argument to say that this player should be the number one ranked player over a guy like Shane Wright, who, I'm going to be honest, I feel like there's been a little bit of a Stockholm syndrome going on with this player. Here's a comment on Reddit that really does sum up this idea nicely here. It's a bit like 2016 when Corey Pronman, the same guy, had Line over Matthews. What's also funny is that Wright's shot has somehow gone down from a high-end shot in January to just above average for these rankings. That also is a pretty interesting note to make aware of because I think everybody kind of remembers Shane Wright from last year's World Under-18s. The guy was an absolute snipe show, and that quality of his game is still there today, you know? It's just a lot of people, scouts, fans, media alike, are all watching this guy so much that when he has what a lot of people would say is a down year, which I believe he did have, it's a lot easier to say, oh, is his shot really all too good? Is his shot really that number one goal scorer, 40 goal potential kind of shot? Is he really that kind of player, or is he just a guy who's going to project as a two-way player that could be a number two center on an NHL roster, etc., etc., etc.? Lester Ballard over here says that Wright is getting the same treatment as Veleno and Chychrun. Scouts have seen too much of them and are starting to nitpick their game to death as 17-year-olds. Wright is going to be Tavares 2.0. The reply here says that Wright's getting nitpicked because his play itself has not been outstanding. His 1.45 points per game, I believe, is the worst first overall CHL point per game player since Rick Nash. I think odds are higher that Wright's a hishier than a Tavares, still a very good player, and I'd take that first overall, but he is not a slam dunk star. Now, we'll see where exactly everything goes from here. Shane Wright was supposed to be a franchise borderline player a few years ago when people were starting to talk about him as he was entering the OHL, but as we said, he had a down year this year. So, who knows how exactly he is going to project into the future. The fact is, though, when you talk about long-term potential and what these players could be at the NHL level, Shane Wright still, if he maxes out to what his absolute ceiling could be, is still a first overall caliber prospect. It's just, for Juraj Slafkovsky and the way that he projects, the numbers and everything, if you want to go ahead and use that number argument that Shane Wright had going against him, it's even worse with Slafkovsky in this conversation. And plus, when it comes to tournaments individually boosting a prospect stock, the last time we really saw this and have it play such a big part in their overall projectability, I believe it was Filip Zadina in 2018. His World Juniors was absolutely phenomenal, which is really what pulled him up the draft boards before actually having him slip to 6 when he was supposed to be a third overall guy, go figure. But also, when you're talking about Juraj Slafkovsky, he does have an absolutely sky-high ceiling. His absolute peak is arguably higher than the absolute peaks of a lot of other players in this draft. It's just, I feel like the likelihood of him reaching that is more like a 10-20% chance, whereas Logan Cooley, who might have a lower high-potential ceiling, might have a 40 or 45% chance of reaching his ceiling. Because at the end of the day, Slafkovsky is a very big, very strong, and skilled winger who plays very well in the boards, he's got some good hands, he's got finesse, and if he really maxes out, I do feel, I've said this before, he could be somewhat of a discount Rick Nash kind of guy, and Rick Nash was absolutely dominant at the NHL level. It's just a lot needs to go right for Slafkovsky between the ears and behind the eyes, as well as in terms of consistency, to really project him to doing that. Also, he's got to probably improve his league play as well, because even though he did have a good World Championships, his Liga numbers were still not all too great, and now we're going in circles because this is a conversation we have had before. So talk to me in the comments all your thoughts about Corey Pronman ranking Juraj Slafkovsky over Shane Wright. I could understand the perspective from saying, okay, I think that Slafkovsky's ceiling is higher than Wright's. That idea makes sense to me, although in my personal belief, I do feel like Shane Wright's ceiling is a lot more attainable and like a lot more realistic for him to actually achieve than Slafkovsky's. Even though Slafkovsky's might be higher, it's not as likely for him to reach it in my opinion. So that also is an aspect of the conversation that I do not think has been touched upon when talking about the prospects, but let me know in the comments all your thoughts about Slafkovsky, Wright, Cooley, who also is in there. We didn't talk about him as much as I wanted to, but Devils fans, Canadiens fans, what are your thoughts? I hope you enjoyed this video. 99, and bye.